Hey, what's going on, guys? KOEG here. So recently somebody asked me, hey, what are your thoughts on Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis? You know, now that we've seen closed beta footage, I want to know what you think. So I want to put this out there. I originally didn't want to comment on any of my thoughts when it comes to Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis, mainly because a lot of things were still a little bit unknown to me. But after going back over some of the footage that I got, finding more gameplay videos from the Japanese player base, and then just taking a break, I feel like I can finally give a proper opinion on what I think about New Genesis. So here we go. Also, I want to know your thoughts down in the comment section below. So when I look back at New Genesis, I can't help but just realize that this feels more like a brand new game than it does a continuation of Phantasy Star Online 2. However, the history of Phantasy Star Online 2 has always been about progression and breaking the mold that it set for itself. When I look at specifically Phantasy Star Online 2, I think of episodes 1 through 3. Then I think of how it wanted to stay relevant by adding in the Isekai arc with episode 4, and then finally moving on into a more medieval theme, and then again finally leaving itself back in its sci-fi roots with episode 6, with one of the greatest soundtracks and continuations of the story that I've ever had the ability to experience. New Genesis only adds on to all of that, now updating the gameplay into a faster player base that then makes it a lot more accessible to the new player. Starting with my idea about the combat system, I feel like the combat system now is incredibly well made. In PSO2 original, it always felt that unless you were playing one of the Scion classes as your main or sub job, you were doing yourself a disservice, with the exception of Gunner Fighter. And the reason I say this is because back in some of the previous Phantasy Star games, it always felt that the Scion classes, for example, in Phantasy Star Universe, you had Gunmaster, Phi Master, as well as Master Force. And while those classes were incredibly strong, they also didn't just break the mold and make it so that way those are the only classes that you ever had to play. I've been using the example of Acrotecher a lot, and a couple of my friends have been using the example of ProTranser. But even in those games, the Scion classes or the Master classes weren't the end-all be-all. What it looks like to me is that New Genesis is looking to fix that, making it so that way every single class now has that Scion class feel. To me, it doesn't feel like classes are at any disadvantage from one another. Now it's a matter of personal preference and play style. Classes seem a little bit more defined, and to use an example, Tekker is the only class that seems to have access to shift to D-band. This makes it so classes like Tekker are finally useful and in demand. Whereas previously, one of the big issues was everyone had shift to D-band and nothing felt special out of Tekker. And again, I just use this as an example just to give you an idea that now things feel like no matter what class I'm going to be playing, I'm going to have a role and or I'm going to be able to feel like I'm worth it when it comes to party play. Now, this is based on the simplified skill trees that we saw because we were only able to see one weapon per class, as well as some of the abilities for those classes because the cap in the beta was level 15. But I think you get my point on how things just feel better. And while on the topic of things feeling better, a lot of the mechanics and operations of the game just seem to be a little bit more defined and simplified. That makes it so that way you don't need a college degree and a PhD in order to figure out the affixing system and its recipes anymore. This makes it so that way now you can literally button mash and enjoy the game if that's how you really feel. While sure, there's going to be more optimal ways of playing your classes and or affixing, a lot of these systems are now easily accessible to literally anyone. But then the only difference is mastering of the small, minute mechanics. So far, I hope that all of this makes sense. I don't feel like anyone's going to get lost other than looking to find certain items anymore. I then also begin to think about the new player experience and how people are going to see things coming from Phantasy Star Online 2 to New Genesis. For a lot of my friends personally, they've only ever experienced Phantasy Star Online 2. And finally, after all this time, only a couple of them were really able to wrap their head around the game and reach what's the quote-unquote end game. And while I feel like going from Phantasy Star Online 2 is now going to have them relearn Phantasy Star New Genesis, I think that's okay because the learning curve between the two games is a lot smaller. Now, sure, you'll have some of the advantages coming in from Phantasy Star Online 2, mainly because you'll have your weapons that'll be able to transfer over as well as your units. But for all of my friends who felt like they couldn't get their head around Phantasy Star Online 2, can then now try Phantasy Star New Genesis and not feel at any sort of disadvantage. The biggest experience is going to be looking at how weird and how different our characters are going to look, because we've been used to seeing them in one particular way that a lot of us, and I've seen it in my comment section below, almost feel like they didn't really have to do a graphics update. And while I'm going to agree to disagree on that particular topic because I did feel that certain things just look dated, what's enjoyable to me is that now those players who are completely social, now they're able to make their original characters the perfect way that they've been always wanting to. So for my friends who felt the game was daunting and that they had to be running the end game content, I no longer feel that way. I feel like they can play the game at their own pace now and feel as if they can enjoy the social experience as well as enjoy the end game experience at their reasonable pace. Now, these feelings are really only amplified when it comes to the global version of the game, mainly because of how things wound up going. But I digress. One other nod that I really do enjoy, at least this is what it seems like, is the addition that a lot of things still feel like Phantasy Star. What I mean is that a lot of the enemies that come back into the game so far that we've seen have been with the Phantasy Star franchise since the beginning. And then even the new fauna or even the new enemy types that are in New Genesis. For the returning player or the fan of the franchise, this feels incredibly familiar and just continues to add to that excitement. The fact that I can say that I've either seen that enemy before or I know the history on how that enemy came to be, for me, this is awesome. And then you have players like myself who we spent the most time playing the Xbox 360 version of Phantasy Star Universe, seeing the subtle nods that are now available in New Genesis that just make me go and say, man, that feels more like that game I used to play in high school. Just adds on to that even more. But to get back on my thoughts on the closed beta test and what we saw, I'm happy. I'm excited. There is not very many things that I was expecting when it comes to New Genesis, but what I saw was exceeding every expectation that I might have had. To address all of the comments that it feels unfinished, you're right. It's a closed beta test. But then looking into the speculation or the idea of what could actually be, yeah, sure, I want Braver and Bouncer too, but then I look at every other class and it just seems like they learned from Braver, Bouncer, and the Scions and then just said, let's add that to everybody. I mean, how can I not be excited, you know? But as I said before, there's just still a lot of things that are on the table that I really want to know. And it has nothing to do with whether or not I'm going to stick with the game for the long haul. Sega or anybody at Sega, if you're listening to my video, you got me for life. But moving on real quick. Everything just feels more modern and updated, and a lot of people have been excited for games like Blue Protocol and or Grand Saga or whatever other games that are coming out, and the most recent trend, which is Genshin Impact. While a lot of things are clearly different when it comes to all of these different games, I fully expect to see a lot of overlap, and mainly because of how strong and how awesome this game is going to become. And for every reason that I mentioned before, the game will be a lot more accessible. But anyway, I could talk about this all day. Hey, thank you guys again for listening on my thoughts on, New Genesis, at least what we know of the closed beta so far. Closed beta test 2 is going to be on the way, and honestly, I can't wait to get my hands on it. But anyway, I think I'm going to end the video out here. Again, the closed beta test was amazing. There was a lot of subtle nods to Phantasy Star Universe. The combat looks incredible and way better than I thought it would have even imagined to look. And sure, we saw footage before of the combat system. It just kind of solidifies that fact, seeing it in action, like with actual players behind it. But anyway, guys, stay awesome, stay beautiful. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace. I'm out.